Salutations. I was pondering my orb of negativity and overwhelmed by my disgust at the modern gaming industry. After experiencing the downfall of Helldivers 2 and seeing the shocking release of yet another soulless Star Wars game, I decided to attempt to quantify and explain the state of the gaming industry and what I think could be done to curb this terrible trend in our entertainment mediums. We are in a drought of good games. The ones releasing are riddled with issues and live updates. Others are releasing in broken states or releasing with decade-old graphics and terrible mechanics. Gaming is feeling like less of an art form and more of a corporate concoction of ingredients that have been focus group tested to ensure the most playtime from players. But these games releasing have no soul. They feel disingenuous, like a haphazard combination of popular elements from past games, thrown together with increasingly worse graphics, the strange trend of ugly protagonists, and of course the predatory monetization schemes. Which is why I believe what we need is a return to the classics. There's a reason Alien and Terminator are still regarded as some of the best movies of all time. Juggernauts of 80s film, masterclasses in storytelling, truly works of art that deserve their pedestal. I feel that Diablo, Fallout, and Baldur's Gate hold a similar place as 90s game juggernauts. These games spawned dozens of similar copies and would become the cornerstone for games in the future to build their worlds around. Similar to those 80s action movies, these games were popular, not only because they were the first of their kind, but because they were artfully crafted, with originality, coherent storylines, engaging gameplay, and memorable aesthetics. With this in mind, I believe the next step gaming should take is a wave of remasters. Now, there's going to be a few different reactions to this solution. First of all, I'll clarify that new and old generations of gamers has nothing to do with the individual's age, but rather when they started playing video games. If your first full playthrough was Diablo II, then your base understanding of graphical fidelity is the beautiful pixelated graphics of D2. If you started with Skyrim, then the vast landscape of 3D trees, waterfalls, and mountains is your base understanding for graphical fidelity. This is the dichotomy of new and old generations of gamers, because it's easy to move forward with increasing graphical fidelity. It's more difficult for gamers to move backwards to worse, with air quotations of course, looking games. Some people will say, we should leave those old games alone. They are great the way they are, why change them? And while this is true, I think that many new players would choose not to engage with these older games because of the graphical limitations and old gameplay mechanics. All that needs done is taking these masterpieces and upping the graphics while smoothing out some of the existing bugs. It does not require changing the original game's content, only the view through which we engage with it. Someone might say, leave the old games alone. If new players want to play them, they still can. While this is technically true that the option is there, I don't think new players are compelled, interested, or in some cases even know of the existence of these old games. I think we have a generational gap in gaming, where older players experienced the games of the early 2000s, as well as the boom of the first-person shooters and MMOs in the following years. Newer generations of players have only really experienced the time after the major boom in gaming during the 2010s. And haven't played or don't know about the older generations of games. Their understanding of games is games released in the 2010s and then games like Tetris. But there's a murky area in between of some of the best games that came out in the late 90s and early 2000s. Or, newer generations of gamers assume that these titles are cumulative progression in the game's mechanics. For example, they might be under the impression that Fallout 3 would have obviously taken all of the best elements of Fallout 2 and built on them. The same way we'd assume a 2020 toaster oven is just going to be all of the best elements of a 2012 toaster oven, so why would you ever need to go back to a previous version? It's a natural assumption for people to make, and many people don't stop to realize how prevalent this assumption is in the gaming world. And so, bringing these older experiences through a graphical upgrade is a clear way to bridge the gap between what I consider to be the best of gaming, and offer it to the newer generations of gamers in a more palatable way. And someone might say, why do you care? They are playing what they like, we know about the older games and still enjoy them, just leave things how they are. Everyone can play what they like. And this is also true, and ultimately comes down to my subjective opinion that I don't want gaming to be Fortnite 5 and looter shooter microtransaction version 30 when I'm older. I want gaming to return to what it was, an art form. Not just a dopamine farm to fill the empty hours of people's afternoons and weekends. And that might seem reductive, but that is how I see modern gaming. It's a factory of engagement built on dopamine rushes, without any real function aside from eating your time. Now, without getting too philosophical, I think art is important in a society. It's a reflection of the ideas and virtues of a society. And on some level, I think it's notable that our art of video games has moved from enjoying compelling worlds and experiences to algorithmic dopamine farms of neon eye candy. In a relatively short time from video games creation, we went from arcade games to the first RPGs and shooters to MMOs and everything in between to end up with consistently terrible games. I don't know if it says more about the companies or the individuals who are willing to consistently buy these games. Or maybe both, but it's definitely a reflection of our time in a broader sense, and it's shit. There is meaningful merit and benefit to these things when they are done right. Addicting lonely people to a dopamine drip where the end goal is simply leeching as much of your time and money as they can is antithetical to the purpose of art, in my view. I think we need a return to the old games, where selling copies was based on having an amazing experience and not addicting a player on the dopamine drip. And I want to make sure I'm bringing us back down to earth, because I'm not talking about any mystical, transcendent game that literally brings you to heaven. Just look at the difference between Spyro and a modern game. Spyro sells you a whimsical experience full of challenge and the promise of an enjoyable time. These new games are releasing with the promise of what? Patches, microtransactions, and servers with no guarantee they will even stay online. For what? For shitty shooter gameplay that's worse than what we had 10 years ago? And the only remedy I see for this trend in gaming is a full shift in the industry. A start to that would be remastering old titles and bringing these experiences to newer generations of gamers. There is a worry that by remastering these titles, gaming studios will fundamentally change the games. I think Diablo II is the shining example of how this needs to be done. Diablo II Remastered is a beautiful game. It runs smoothly, and it brings the experience of playing a game from the 90s to new players who would have otherwise not played the game. The enemies take on more defined forms, as their pixelated sprites are represented more accurately. The original enemy designs were abstract due to their graphical limitations. With the remaster, we can see the creators' exact designs brought to life. The hunters always looked this way. The devs just weren't able to portray them in their complete visual depth due to the limitations of their technology. But now, rather than changing what already existed, devs are able to fully flesh out the visual designs they created for their world. The towns are brought to a new state of lifelike activity. Whereas before they were stunning representations of fantastical locations, they could only go so far as the graphical limitations allowed. But with the remaster, we can see Loot Golem in its intended glory. Spells, both yours and enemies, shine with dynamic lighting through the catacombs and dungeons. Beasts take on more imposing forms than their murky silhouettes, showing the faces of monsters in new depth. Diablo II Remastered is a faithful, respectful, and well-done release of an existing game in a form that is visually palatable for those that played it originally, as well as thousands of gamers who wouldn't have engaged with it due to the age of the original. And the remaster even includes a mode to swap between the remastered graphics and the vanilla performance of its original version. This, in my opinion, is the ideal way to remaster a game and bring the original masterpiece to newer audiences. The core gameplay is the same. You are still playing Diablo II. The core gameplay loop and experience that captured the attention of thousands of players is faithfully carried forward. None of the original challenge or design is lost. If game developers took the same steps in remastering other games, we could see a resurgent boom in the gaming industry. If these older titles were brought forward and reintroduced with more modern graphical fidelity, I believe we might see a change in the trajectory of modern gaming. Gamers who would never have gone back and play through these older titles would experience what I believe is the best that gaming has to offer, in a medium that is more palatable for their modern gaming sensibilities. Until recently, I was against remastering games. It feels similar to remaking old Disney movies to me. Just a cash grab for a cheap reconstruction of several core elements, but the remaster of Diablo II showed that it can be done the right way. Not only Diablo II, but Spyro's remaster was done with respect to the source material as well. I'm genuinely glad to see these two games being remastered, especially since I played both back in the day and remember thinking they looked real back then. But I'd like to see a wave of remasters, especially for the old PS1 to PS3 games. If new players played through a realistic-looking Morrowind, imagine how much their view on recent RPGs would change. I'd like to see the first two Baldur's Gate games remastered. They have been upgraded in their enhanced editions, but I'd like to see these games brought to the same graphical level as Diablo II Remastered. And not just that, what if we brought the old Battlefront games to the same graphical fidelity as the... Oh no, where'd my serotonin go? These games and more. I'm sure you can think of a couple off of the top of your head while watching this. I don't think it's a crazy notion to think that perhaps the best of gaming has already passed, and maybe the only way forward is to return to the best and begin a fresh start from there. I want Fallout and Fallout 2 brought to a new visual form. A faithful remaster would revitalize the Fallout community. On my Fallout videos, many people express how they haven't played the older games due to the clunky mechanics and abstract graphics. By bringing these games to a more lifelike visual medium, I believe people would be much more willing to take the time and learn the mechanics of these older games. If it hasn't been obvious by the content of my channel, I desperately want people to go back and play these older games. If you enjoyed the distinct Fallout style, elements, and brutal, bleak nature of the post-apocalypse in the newer Fallout games, I have to ask, where do you think it came from? All of the best core elements that have been carried on to their sequels began with these first two installments. Fans of the older games are trying to communicate that the elements of Fallout many people love in the newer games are executed 100 times better in the original titles. And so, bringing these older titles to the newer fans is an obvious pathway forward, to show people how much better their favorite IPs can be. Once people have experienced what they enjoy, but done better, they'll move forward with a more critical and well-balanced standard for games. For any who haven't played it, Baldur's Gate is essentially the early Fallouts, but in a medieval fantasy version. We all saw the massive popularity of Baldur's Gate 3 in recent years. How many of those players have experienced the original glory of the first and second game? I'm not sure, but I'd bet my spleen that the majority of people who enjoyed the newer versions haven't played its predecessors. And if they enjoy what Baldur's Gate 3 has to offer, again, where do you think it came from? The best elements of Baldur's Gate 3 are also in two completely different stories that take place within the same world. It seems to me, and I'll wrap up on this point, that thousands of players enjoy sequels of older games, or titles inspired by these older games. And yet, for the most part, these sequels offer watered-down, streamlined, and defanged stories that take place in the same world. Fallout went from ultra-terrifying and realistic to PG-13 levels of threats. I mean, just as an example, Fallout 2 allowed you to slaughter children, sell your wife into slavery, and get raped by a super mutant. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise that that's not why people play the game, but it clearly shows the devs took their players seriously and did not hold back from creating the darkest elements of what a post-apocalypse would truly be like. It shows the devs were willing to put all options on the board, altruistic good and despicable evil. They created a level of depth and allowed the player to travel through it on the player's terms. Newer games don't let you be evil, not because modern companies are altruistic or well-meaning, but because newer games offer you significantly less freedom to make your own decisions in their worlds. Modern games are streamlining and cultivating the experience for you. They intend you to play through a certain way, and they have crafted the games to their ideal playthrough. One of the ways we can see this change is through a lack of balanced morality in the newer Fallout games. Another example could be the combat in Elder Scrolls games. They are fundamentally stripping away layers and streamlining the experience with each new installment. Just look at Morrowind's build diversity and compare it to Skyrim. Devs are shedding depth for an easier, more streamlined way to play, imposing more boundaries on players' choices and replayability with each release. Rather than create an open experience for players to engage with, newer titles are creating a roller coaster of visuals for players to go through over and over, paired with the fresh hell that is increasingly vampiric monetization schemes. I don't believe remastering older games will be the savior of the gaming industry, or pull some sort of Jesus moment and save everybody. But I do think that if newer generations of gamers were to experience these older games, they'd realize how much of a downgrade the art of gaming has taken in the past 10 years. They'd be more critical of newer games releasing, and in turn might just shift the market towards respecting players more. Game companies might have to try harder to create good games that audiences love, rather than pumping out soulless husks and expecting players to readily hop on the newest dopamine drip and sedate themselves. This video was pretty different from the stuff I usually make on my channel, and I think there might have been some hot takes in there, so definitely let me know what you thought in the comments. See ya.